Hello everyone. I'm just checking that my mic is working or not. Are you hearing already? Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So we are going to talk about GraphQL, Typescript in the backend in this session. Maybe we are going to plan more about how to use it in front end also. But today's session is about using GraphQL and Typescript on the backend. So before we start, I will give you a really brief introduction about myself. I'm Chathu. I'm Auth0 Ambassador and who actually wrangled in JavaScript. And I run my own startup and I'm from Sri Lanka. And if you want to have follow-up any questions, you can follow me at I am Chathu in Twitter and most of the social media. So let's get started. So first of all, I'm going to start it with a disclaimer that all ideas and the methods that I discuss are my own personal views and doesn't respect or show you anything from my companies or the community that I am associated with. So this is about only my personal views. So let's start with the first part. So we are going to talk about TypeScript. So it's a kind of a superset of a JavaScript with some superpowers. What are the superpowers? So as I said, it's a superset. So it actually extends JavaScript by adding types to the language. I think you already heard about JavaScript. JavaScript kind of have a loosely type system. So it's kind of a good for a beginner to jump in, but when it comes to a very large code base, it's very kind of annoying to have this loose typing. So TypeScript actually bridge that thing and get the types to the language. And it also speed up your development and your developer experience to almost catch your most of the human errors and also give you fixes even you run the code, because Yeah, let's see. So when it comes to TypeScript, it's actually superset of JavaScript, as I said earlier, and it is open source. So it is resided in GitHub, and it also backed by Microsoft. So they are actually pushing forward this project. It actually started in 2012 October, and till then, from there to now, it's actually having multiple issues and putting off that issues and fixing bugs and introducing new features. So it came along till now from 2012. It is actually a transpiled language. So what is transpiled? So maybe you heard about compile. So it's kind of a way like compiling where you have a superset of JavaScript and you are going to transpile it to the normal JavaScript that you are basically runs in browser or other JavaScript environment like Node. It also adds a type support to JavaScript. So now you get variable types, function return types, and many other stuff from the TypeScript world. It also adds support to object-oriented programming features. It also adds like keyword like public, private, protected, all the object-oriented features. You have interfaces, classes, all are there. Most of that features are now already in JavaScript also, but still the private is still on the way. And it also supports upcoming ES features. I will use the terms JavaScript and ECMAScript or ES interchangeably. I think you already know the reason. So ECMAScript is actually the standard for the JavaScript. And because of this has typings, it also used for the code integrations like VS Code, or if you're using any other IDE, TypeScript has all the code integration support where you can use the types, and when you put dot or something into your object, you can get all the method that is supported. And it also self-document the code because you define that what are the types you accept and what are the types you are going to return. So it's kind of a creating documentation for your code. And also there are some tools that you can actually generate we call it TS doc from your TypeScript code. And there's a recent news. There's a new framework in the town. It's called Dino. It's also created from the creator of Node.js. So it has first-class support to TypeScript. So whatever things you are written in TypeScript will be running on Dino. Yeah, let's move forward then. So if we're going to have a little bit of comparison with JavaScript with TypeScript, in your left side you have JavaScript. I define a function where you're actually going to add two numbers. The thing is, in JavaScript, it is not typed, so you can actually pass two string to the function and you get a result, because in JavaScript, if you add two variables, the string variables, it's going to be string concatenation. In TypeScript, you can see in the difference where we actually define the types, the variable type number, and when it's come to the compile state or the transpile state, it's going to throw an ES error. This doesn't mean it gives you the type validations, input validations. It actually means it checks for the types before compilation. This doesn't mean that things can happen in runtime, but this means actually it's going to be checked at compile time. So these kind of cool features are coming from TypeScript. And if you're going for more comparisons, JavaScript actually standard is followed by ECMAScript, and TypeScript is actually backed by Microsoft and from the community also. And in JavaScript, you don't need to transpile. You just type JavaScript, and it's going to be run in any browser or any JavaScript supported environment. When it comes to TypeScript, any valid JavaScript is actually valid TypeScript, because this TypeScript is a superset, so the subset is actually JavaScript, so it's working with there. And you need to transpile it to run in JavaScript environments. The other difference is actually when it comes to the new features, new language features to JavaScript, it has a kind of a TC39 process where you going to draft your feature and it's going to follow for 4 steps. So these 4 stages need to complete to be implemented in the browsers and the environments. So normally you need to wait for till the stage 4 pass and the implementations. So when it comes to TypeScript, the new features will be available faster, and it will be fully filled, or it will be transpiled into the lower level of JavaScript. So you will be able to work in cutting edge features. So whenever the new feature is going to be announced, you are already using it if you are using TypeScript. And there's some misconceptions, so I thought of having another slide to give you that type is not actually isn't going to validate your inputs. So that doesn't mean that you are going to reduce your input validation process, that TypeScript is going to check for it is integer or not, so I am protected. No, you need to do that anyway. This is kind of a way of reducing human errors. Doesn't mean that you don't need to run validations, and it doesn't going to fix your runtime errors, because when it transpiled, it's JavaScript, so it is going to be run in there, so it doesn't have any typings or anything when it runtime. So that's another misconception. And because I have all these typings, that means I don't need to write separate test. No, you still need to maintain your test. Tests are good for your code, and it makes you more comfortable when you're deploying your code to production. And TypeScript is not the only project that adds the type support to JavaScript. There's CoffeeScript is there, and there's something called Flow Type from Facebook. So there are other projects. So it is not TypeScript. CoffeeScript was there even before, as I remember, TypeScript coming to pop-up. And CoffeeScript kind of like have a Ruby-ish coding style. So if you are coming from Ruby background, that maybe the CoffeeScript will be more comfortable for you. If you're coming from Java or C# or any object-oriented language type, the TypeScript kind of be your own, kind of be a kind of a fit for you. So that's kind of a ending introduction for the TypeScript. Now we are going to move towards our other topic. Yeah, we are going to talk about GraphQL. When it comes to abbreviation, it's Graph query language. So GraphQL is actually a query language for APIs. That's the thing, that is query language for APIs, and it also have a runtime for fulfilling that queries. So it is kind of a query language for APIs, and it also has runtime. Also, what is GraphQL? Let's think about it. So it's actually only a specification. So GraphQL is kind of a specification. It's just a documentation created how that we are going to handle the resources. So it's just a specification at the start. Later, the Facebook also introduced its implementation. So it is open source. Even the specification is open source, and it's running by a GraphQL Foundation, and it's actually backed by Facebook. This GraphQL thing is actually get to more attention from Facebook, and they are the one who actually released it. Later, they actually moved to an organization also. So there are many implementations. So you have GraphQL server. When it comes to server side, there is GraphQL reference implementation for Node. There's implementation for Go, Rust, and there's implementation for Ruby also. And also there's implementation for PHP. So there are many implementation from the community. So there's a specification and people creating services and servers and clients for this specification. So even the front ends also, they have many projects. There's a one called Relay from Facebook for the front end, and there's another one from Apple. They are actually for client side, and for the server side, there's Apple server for the backend, and there are some other implementations also. So GraphQL actually gives us a declarative data fetching. I'm going to talk about more in this one. It's actually the client can declare what the properties or the what data that he needs, and server only provide that one, not least or not more. So, and you can get multiple resources from one request. So these two features actually create more and more comfortability towards resources that serving for the mobile devices, because when it comes to mobile devices, it has very limited amount of data and connectivity speeds. So it's better that we can get a lesser amount that actually the mobile device wanted. Like if you're going to fetch for an API endpoint and you're getting about plenty of like 20 or something about fields, but you actually need 2 fields. So if you only send about that 2 fields, that is going to be kind of enough for your use case. So this is the one that is going to be solved by the GraphQL, and it is strongly typed. So you define the types for your resources, and it's going to be type checked from the GraphQL layer itself. You cannot send something for a server where like you asking for a boolean, but you are going to send it for the string instead of a boolean. So that's going to be rejected at time. So it's kind of a strongly typed from the GraphQL layer itself. It's a kind of a way of exposing resources from a service, and it's not a way of managing database. It's another one. So you will be kind of get a misconception maybe in this hands-on. So I'm going to make it clear in the first place. This is not actually a way of managing databases. It's actually exposing resources, a way of exposing resources. And if I get a graph, actually this graph is got from Apollo documentation. So you can have multiple clients for your GraphQL gateway. You have web, and you can have a mobile phone clients also. And from GraphQL endpoint itself, you can expose existing REST API, or you can expose microservices who has REST API support, or even if they are another GraphQL services, totally fine. And you can just send the database request also. So it is not about anything handling database or anything. You have this complete picture that you can actually expose. So some of people trying to actually compare GraphQL with REST APIs. Let's see about that. So before going to a comparison, let's see how this process in a simplified manner. The first step is actually we need to describe our data. So we normally define the types of the data. So I have a type called project, and it has a three properties. So this is kind of an object type. So it's a project which has a name with a string, name as a string value, and there's a tagline as a string value, and there's a contributors who are array of users. So it's kind of a multiple users are there. So first you need to describe your data. Sorry. The next process is the client side. You can ask for which data you want. I need the project with a name GraphQL, and I only need the tagline property of that one. So this is the meaning of this request. And the resource, the result will be exactly what you asked. It will be giving the project tagline property that you asked. And if you go to the comparison REST GraphQL, so when it comes to, let's say you have a scenario where you have a server where you sending responses about books, and each book has its own author, and you get a book, few books with, and you need to get the author details, like it only has the author ID. So you need to send another request for each and other authors to get their details. Like you only need the name, but you need still you send the author request with the author ID and get the whole author data and filter it, get the just only your name. When it comes to GraphQL, the same request will be like this. This has only one endpoint, and you send your request with the response kind of a declarative way. So you send, I need books, and I only need name, email, and the author name. So, and you will get the resources from here. So there's two resources. Actually, it's going to fetch books details and author details, but only return the things that you actually asked. So if you're going to discuss it more, yeah, is that cool? Yeah. So this is going to be like that. So when it comes to REST, it has many endpoints based on resources. Like you have an endpoint for books, and it has a post endpoint to add books, and there's a put endpoint to update, and maybe a delete endpoint to delete the book. And you have an ID endpoint, the book/ID, to get a single data. And you have multiple endpoints for all the, and so it's be kind of a multiple endpoints. And it's used the resource plus HTTP method, as I say, that you have put request or get request likewise. And the shape of the size of the response is defined by the server. You defined in the server that if you ask for a get request for books, I will returning an array of all the properties of the book. So you get what the server sent to you. And if you have a relation data, like you have a book and you have an author, and so then you have two relational data, but you need to send multiple requests to get data. So I send a request to books to get the book detail, and to get the author details, you send another request to your REST API to get the author details. When it comes to GraphQL, there's only one URL endpoint. Most of the time, it only uses post requests, so every request will be a post. There are a few servers and implementation where you can actually make queries into a GET request, so you can have a caching or something. But normally, the normal way is actually sending everything in a post request. And response is actually defined by the user. He actually define what the data he wants and send that as a request, and you will get the exact data that you request. And you can retrieve relational data from a single query. You can ask for a relational data mapping that I need this data, and it will be handling from the GraphQL endpoints. Where should I fetch the data? Is it from this database or this collection, or this going to be this table? So this is totally handled by the GraphQL server, and you will get the data that actually you want. Most of the time, you can actually do it in one request. And when it comes, as I said about, it has types. See, strongly typed. So it has a kind of multiple types. So main things are, there's a scalar types and object types. So there's about 5 built-in scalar types. We call it string for string data, float, int, boolean, and id. Id is a special thing, but it is an actually string. And it is actually defined for some client to do kind of a caching, and having the cache as the ID tell that it is a string and it's a unique value. But GraphQL server it doesn't going to make it unique or check for uniques. It just mean for your front ends or the clients, this is an ID. It's normally be defined as a unique, so you can use it for your caching or normalizing your data. And the object types are actually custom shapes with multiple fields, one or many fields, that either scalar type or composed with another object types. So basically, GraphQL is like SQL for your APIs, just touching the surface. And there's another special types. We call it query and mutation types. query type, as it says. So in simple terms, it's kind of a CRUD operations for your API: create, read, update, and delete. So queries are actually read the data. So you can actually read the data from resources as a query. So you ask a query about, I need this data, and it's going to be responsive with it. So query is actually just a name with optional arguments. You can have arguments. Like in my previous example, I have a project with the name of GraphQL. So likewise, you can have optional arguments or just an operation name like book or books or book by ID. So it's an operation name with argument, and it's actually written a type. So these two types, query and mutation types, they are actually written a type. So mutation is like same like a query. You actually send the request, but it's actually in the backend, it's going to be execute an operation that's going to be change the resource, maybe like update operation, or adding a new record to the database, or maybe sending an email, or generating a JWT token, or sending SMS, or sending another request to another server. So it's kind of if you are running an execution or some kind of a change operation in the server, it's going to be a mutation. If you're just returning a response, it's going to be kind of a query. You're just sending your data from one place to another, maybe database, or from a REST API, or from another API from a third party. And queries or mutation are the things that people use to interact with the service. The scalar types and the object types, they are defined what these operations require as arguments, or what are the types that they are going to return. So anyway, you're going to see as a query or mutation, not the other types. So this is GraphQL schema language. We call it SDL, GraphQL, the schema definition language. So this is actually the cheat sheet of the language. It has how to define scalar types, or what are the scalar types available. So I'm going to talk more about this in hands-on session. So don't make more like kind of a nervous situation. I'm not understanding anything, so it's totally fine. So below is the link for that cheat sheet. Maybe you will need it to reference later. And yeah, so I actually talk a lot of content now about this GraphQL and TypeScript. Maybe you actually like to see how it's going to be work in a real world. So I'm going to do an hands-on session. So for this demo, so it's going to be a hands-on session. Maybe it's going to be very hard for me because it's going to be my first hands-on session. So I'm going to use MongoDB Atlas database. It's free. Or if you have a local MongoDB installation, totally fine. And I think that you have some understanding on JavaScript and a little bit of Node.js, totally fine. If you don't not know, you can actually follow along. And not required, but it's nice to have some experience with MongoDB and Mongoose. Mongoose is actually the library that we use to interact with the MongoDB from Node.js. And you can use your own ID of preference. Most of the IDEs currently have the TypeScript support. And yeah, of course, you need to have Git if you're going to follow along with me. Yeah, so it's a hands-on, and you can actually use this short link. I will be displaying it about another few seconds. You can use this link to go to my repository. It's public in GitHub, and you can clone it, and you can check into the step 1 branch, because the master branch is already completed. It's in the final stage. So you can start with the step 1 branch. Yeah. Okay, I will try to put it in the YouTube stream comment section for the link. So if you're going to follow it along later, you can maybe download it from here. Hope this is going to be working. Okay. Okay. I'm going to open my IDE and hope it's not going to. I hope now you can see it clearly. How the front is working. Cool. Okay, so now what we are going to do is I'm going to first give you a round about how this project is structured. This is the basic question. We have a git ignore. So we are going to ignore some stuff related to Node.js like Node modules, .npm, and using cache and all the caches that related to anything that related to JavaScript. So it's about that one. And we have README. So I'm going to use Node.js. Most probably you need to have greater than 10.3 to start about. So better to have the LTS version. The recommended version is go with LTS. And we are going to use Typescript as we discussed in the first phase. And we are going to use a thing called Apollo GraphQL server. And we will go with follow along. And I'm using Yarn as my package manager, not package managing CLI. Yeah, so you can clone it. And if you clone it, you can actually run Yarn. It's going to actually get all the dependencies up and running. So it's done and it's fresh. And if I go to the package.json where I actually define my package, the Node.js is actually full of packages. So this is my server and it's a package. So it has a name of type GraphQL backend and define the default 1.0.0 and give it some description that it is going to be a TypeScript-based GraphQL backend with MongoDB. And it's going to be running in dist, index.js, and you cannot see any dist folder in here. I'm going to discuss it later. And this is the repository. And so I have a scripts. That's the thing, most thing that I need to highlight about it. So there's a build step. So I told about that TypeScript is actually a transpiled, or we call it compiled language. So the TSC, TypeScript compiler, is the one that you actually use to build this one. So if I run yarn build, it's going to invoke TypeScript compiler, and it's going to be compiled in the anything that is defined in, I will going to talk about it in the TS config. And we have a step called start. It's actually production ready way of doing it. I'm going to start with node dist/index.js. So it's going to be running the build version of the JavaScript in the production one. And for the development purposes, I'm going to use a package called node tsnode dev, and it's going to be kind of giving me the features that going to have the hot reloading capabilities. Like when I type something and save the file, it's going to be the restarting the script, and it will be live at that moment. So for that one, I'm using the developer dependencies. These both are actually developer dependencies, TypeScript and the TS node. So that's the first basic. And I have a defined, we call it TS config. Normally we define it from on tsc dash init. So it will be creating a basic TypeScript configuration for you using this one. If you have tsc installed as a global, you can just type TSC init, but I'm not installed the TypeScript as the global dependency. So since I already installed it as developer dependency in here, I can actually use it from yarn-tsc init. So in TSC, the things that you want to know is that I am going to target this. That means when you transpile your JavaScript, it's going to use ES 2018 standards. So all things available in ES 2018 is going to be in there. And the type of module that I'm going to use in here. And the things you need to know is that my root directory is .src, which I am not yet created. And I define the output directory should be the dist. It will be created when we run the first time with the compilation process. And you can have multiple options. You can uncomment them and follow around, and you have all the helps defined in here. Some of these things actually comes with the default turn on. So I have module resolution as Node.js, and things that you need to focus is that I'm going to exclude this folder. That's the things I actually added more. This line and this one and these three are I am the customized one. So let's start it one. I'm going to create the folder src actually. Said earlier. So and I'm going to create src. And I'm going to create the file index.ts. The TypeScript has the extension called ts. Okay. So I don't have anything related to GraphQL now, dependency. So I should check around what I can use it. So I'm going to use a library called Apollo. It's Apollo server. So it has a kind of a documentation here, and you can how to install it. So it has a two dependencies, SQL Server and a GraphQL. GraphQL is the reference implementation from the Facebook and the community. And I'm not going to use the Apollo server. Instead of, I'm going to use, they have an implementation with the integration with Node.js. So you can actually use Apollo Server Express. Because I'm going to use the Express as my server from the Node.js. So let's start adding these dependencies. I'm going to add GraphQL, server, Express, and GraphQL. So yeah, the dependencies already added. And I'm going to go to the sample code in here. So I can actually use this one, or maybe in Express part. There's one in Express. So yeah, let's take this one and customize it as we want. So Apollo server, and this is always writing it in JavaScript. So I'm going to convert this one into more TypeScript friendly way with using the new features like module imports instead of require. Yeah, so schema is not yet defined. So let's comment it for now. So I need to have a file with the schema with exports, type definitions, and resolvers. So type definitions is the one that you are about your GraphQL schema. That, as I said earlier, type definition has the scalar types and object types where you define what kind of resources you are going to export. And the resolvers is actually giving the way of giving you that resources from the server. Resolvers are the one who are going to actually run and send the resources back to you. And yeah, I don't need these brackets. So those who are in the audience, if I having any issues in here, you are more than welcome to help me on this one. So there are many issues are in there saying that there's no export in here. So let's let a look at that one, because we need to define the application. So I'm going to import this from Express, and I'm going to wrap this one with an async function. We call it setup server. So this is a function which is going to be running when a server is setting up. And I'm going to run it in the last page. So it's going to be defined and just going to run it. Okay, so I'm going to define my app. App is actually Express. Just call Express. To run the Express, I need to add the dependency Express. So since Typescript has a support for the typings, as I said, that it explores what are the things of the returning from this script and all stuff. So I need to give the typings for these modules. So some of these npm dependencies comes with types, or some of them doesn't comes with typing from their library itself. So there are a project called definitely type in GitHub. It actually create types for these projects with this notation that we have at type slash at type is a kind of organization slash the project is Express. So yeah, it's actually done by community. So I'm going to add these typings at the developer dependencies. So now the warning is gone here. So now I need to define this schema with these two exports. So I'm going to create a file called schema.ts, and I don't need GQL in here. I just need the Apollo server here. And yeah, so I need a type definition. So I'm going to get it copied. And yeah, I'm going to export that one in here. Export the name of the type def for the function. And just export it as GQL. So GraphQL schema definition, that when, as I said, that it is kind of a definition where you type it as a types with all these details. So, but JavaScript doesn't understand this one, this definition. So you need to use a library which gives understanding to the JavaScript how this thing is going to work. So for that one, we have a library called GQL exported from Apollo server. Give me a second. Go to the step 2. Click around. The same, let's see. So I have to have defined the description. So I'm going to define my first type. It's going to be type book. So I have a book, and it has a book as a title. It's a string, and as an author. Help me with the string spellings. And we have a year. It's actually a number. We don't have a number definition here, but we have an int or float. So I'm going to use int. And I also going to define one operation. Before going this one, let's run the hello world. Then you know what is going on. So I'm going to type a query. So query. This is a query type. So query type, I have a query, and I'm going to define a query called hello, and it returns string. And now I have a type definition, but I need somebody who's going to process this one for the server. So I'm going to create the resolvers. So the name export is a resolvers. So I'm going to export resolvers. And you need to define an object which is going to be look exactly like what you're going to define. So I have a query, and you need to export that one, and you have a hello. So hello is going to be kind of a method. It's going to send hello from WTM Manila. Okay. It's going to be a function. Well, vector it need to be held like this one. Yeah, and not this one. And since I'm exporting the object, it's going to be like this. And the query should be like this. So it's very JSON. We don't need to make this as a look like this one is also fine rather than exporting a function. I have a resources as object, it's as a query. Yeah, so yeah, it's going to be included. Yeah. Still have an error. Maybe I think it's not installed correctly. Let's see when we are going to run it. So I can check there. So we have this one. Seems it module is importing it from somewhere else. So I'm going to install it again. We run until it seems this need to be simple query, not the capital query. It's asking for some catch query. Maybe let's cancel it. So yeah, the query root type is need to be provided. So I think I wait to define that one. Okay, let's check in my code. Glad I had it done it previously. Not in this step one maybe. Yeah, it's for it, and I let's do it from the beginning. So there's an issue in the crude query type is need to be provided. So I think it's in the simple implied version of this one has this issue. I should get it from Apollo. Should be the definition. Yeah. Need to be capital. Yep. Not simple. And mutation should be capital, and it should be automatically reloading now, and it's available on the local of 4000. Yeah. Okay, now you got vanished. What is this? I'll just write about few lines of code, and I have a kind of an IDE thing here. So this is called GraphQL Playground. So most of these GraphQL servers come pre-packaged with the GraphQL Playground, or there's another one from what called GraphQL. So this is kind of a way of interacting with the API, and it's kind of a documentation for API. So if you go to the docs, it says that there's a query called hello, which is going to be returning a string. If I click it more, you can see that there's a hello, and it's written its type string, and its string type details is a scalar type that represents text data. And if you go to schema, so this is the schema. Please ignore these parts. This is coming from the Apollo server. So this is the one that we actually deployed. So we have a type query called hello. So let's call this query, and you can actually put your request as a JSON, as I sent earlier. So the query operation name is hello. So you have your type supports. Since it's actually returning a scalar type, I can just run it. So it sends hello from WP Manila. So what if I need to send an object rather than a scalar type? Yeah, let's move towards that one. I hope that you are comfortable with this one. Okay, there's a question that regarding that it's better to discuss also the Node.js. So I will give you a brief update intro to the Node.js. Node.js actually, you heard about Chromium project, right? So Chrome is coming from Chromium open source project. So they created an engine called V8. It's a JavaScript runtime that actually convert all these JavaScript into web pages and run it in the browser. So people like I forget his name actually. So he actually created then get out this V8 engine from the Chrome and put some server side and open some resources to the underlying system. It created called Node.js. So Node.js is actually a JavaScript runtime where you can actually run codes as a server-side programming language. So you write all this calling in here is actually running on the backend. So the backend is also written in TypeScript or JavaScript. So Express is actually a project where it gives support to the REST APIs and HTTP APIs. So we use Express to run use as the server for the Apollo server. So in here, it's actually we creating the Express instance, and we created the Apollo server instance. And in Apollo server, we can send then as a middleware, this is my application from the Express. And app will be running on port 4000. And when it runs, it's going to call this callback and logs the server ready is in this method. So in my when I run as yarn dev, it's going to run this index.html and import the schema and create the type definitions and resolvers. So since we are okay with hello world, let's move to a kind of a having rather than a scalar value, let's put some object values. So I'm going to create a type called book. Book is a type, and it's as a title, or let's put it as a name. So name going to be a string. We have author, Also string, and we have going to have a year, going to be int. This is my current definition, and I'm going to change hello. We don't need hello, so I'm going to change it as a books. Instead of returning a string, I'm going to return an array of book. Book type is this one, and I'm going to return an array of books. This is how we are going to define the types in GraphQL. So this is an object type which has a scalar type tree. This consists of 3 scalar types fields. So it has a name type of string, and we have an author, which is a type of string, and we have a year, it's a type of integer. So since I'm going to change this query to support these books, because we change the hello now, so it's going to be books. So same query, book. I need to send an array of these books. So I'm going to define books. I'm going to copy it. I have a few books defined, so better to get it. Otherwise, I'm going to type whole ISB in no step. So sorry. So I need to change this to name. So I have 2 books with name Harry Potter and etc. So I'm going to send this as a response. I think it's defined as simple books. So it's going to be returning books now. So it's got 3 pages now. So let's try it in the GraphQL playground. So I'm going to write another query. Let's see the schema now. I'm going to refresh it. So now in my schema, I have a schema type book with name string, author also string as we defined. And we have a query, it's called books, and it's going to return an array. If you go to books, it's going to be like this in the docs. So it has actually, it's already documentation in your APIs. You don't need to use kind of a Swagger or anything that previously used for REST APIs. So I'm going to get books, and since it's actually returning array of objects, I can ask for the field I really like. So I just need the name now. So it's going to return a data. Data will be always there, and books is the one you define here, and the name is the field that you're going to get it and the array. So if you want to get author, so you can add it here, and you can run it again, so you get author. So you are the one who defining what you want actually. If you want year, you can define it. As I said, there's kind of a validations in here. So I have, let's remove this year for now. I'm going to comment it out. So I don't have an year in here. So if I ask for that one, it gives me null. So what if you want to make the year mandatory? Every book has an year. So you need to define in this definition like this. So you make it mandatory. Now schema is actually want an year, and it is mandatory. So if I ask it in now, it's going to be an error. So it's in the errors, cannot return null for non-nullable field book.year. So it's very clear, and you're giving you all the status, and it says that internal server error. So it's from the server side, not the client side. So, and it's trying to return a null for non-nullable field. So these kind of all the things actually handled from the Typescript layer itself. So you don't need to worry about that one. Okay, so now we are actually sending this one from hardcoded one. So what about, let's move into another stage where we can actually connect the MongoDB, a database that we are going to get from the database itself. What are you going to tell? Okay. So in MongoDB, it's called Atlas, where you can actually create a clusters, and you can have multiple projects, and each and every project you can have one cluster free. So this is another project. So if you create another project, you can actually create another cluster, and for this cluster you have a complete server running on. So this is the GraphQL workshop that you are currently working on. So it has 3 objects, and I'm going to talk about this after I'm going to implementation. So currently I put it into the step 4. So we actually currently completed into the 3 steps in my workshop. So you have plenty of time remain. So I'm going to check out to the step 4 to fast forward this one. So it should be big checkout. So I'm actually using an command line plugin for all my SH to shorten my commands. Okay, I need to uncomment all this one. So I'm going to discard the every changes. And I'm going to move to the step 4. Okay, cool. So in step 4, let's see if there are any changes. No, it's the same thing that we ran apart from this mandatory entity. And let's go. So I actually created a few files, if you can see. So first one is, let's go with the new dependencies. What are the new dependencies we have? So we have a change in here. So I add another new node script. So this we call as npm scripts, for those who don't know. So it's a kind of a way of defining the scripts for your project. So you can actually run them using yarn or npm run. So likewise, if you want to build, you can type yarn build is going to run build process. Wait, I need to, since I'm changed the branch, I need to install all the dependencies now. Sorry. When I change the branch, since my dependencies has changed, I need to install that dependencies. Sorry for that one. So like what I'm saying is that I can run this npm script like yarn build. So it's going to run the build process. So you can see now I have a this folder, and it has all the JavaScript ones. So I wrote Typescript, and it's going to generate the JavaScript one. So if I open it, it's going to be kind of sad. Let's see. So this is the one who actually generated. So yeah, this is simple. Default requires is there. So this is typical JavaScript. So JavaScript has async support now, so it's still there, and yeah. So yeah, so it's going to convert like that one. So that's the things happen. Basically, if I convert the schema, it's going to be like this. So that's this folder, and I have a config folder set up for to connect with the MongoDB. We need to have all these database connection details. For that one, I have a configuration, and for this configuration, I define URI, environmental variable called MongoLab URL or MongoDB URL, or it's going to be fall back to the local one with BooksDB. So if you have a local MongoDB running one, you don't need to define anything. It will be automatically running from this configuration. So these are some options that we are using for MongoDB. If you are not comfortable with these things, just follow along. It not be much of a problem. So instead of in here, I'm going to give you some production tip. So I use a package called .env. So it actually supports to define your environmental variables in .env file, and it's going to be loaded up when you call .env.config. So I will call it before this thing's going out. So it's going to load all the things in .env file. For you, I actually created an example file. So if you're using a Mongo Atlas free database, you can actually create that database in the Atlas console that I shown you previously, and you can copy your connection URL into your ENE file. I'm not going to open it. You will see my secret connection URL. So make sure that you're going to rename it. I have all the steps in here, so my README just get updated. So you can create a MongoDB Atlas from this URL. It's free, and you can create a cluster. You can select the AWS provider as Singapore region. I think it's the closest one, or you have a Taiwan server. So whatever you prefer, you can create a server in there, and you need to allow the complete IP set for development, because I hope that you don't have a static IP for your home connections. So if you have a static IP, you can define it in here, or better to allow it for all IPs and all ports. This is not good for production. Make sure this is only for development. And you then after that, you can create a user and password for that connection URL, and then you can copy the .env.example file and paste it as a .env file, because this is not going to be git checkout, and if you are going to clone it, you won't get .env file. So you need to create your own one. That's why I give you example file. You can copy it and make it env and update with your MongoDB URL. Then you will be able to run it. And since you updated it, it's in env, you need to restart the server. So you need to cancel, maybe Control C to cancel it, and you can start it with yarn dev. Then the server is going to be started. So now we have configuration that too. So apart from that one, I'm going to use a project called TypeGoose. TypeGoose actually and adding TypeScript support to Mongoose. So Mongoose is the most prominent and very famous MongoDB object relational mapper, is ODM. So it actually map your MongoDB JSON document to JSON documents in JavaScript side. So MongoDB stores data as JSON document, binary structured object notation. Yeah, like yeah. So that's the MongoDB term for that one. So JavaScript supports JSON. So Mongoose is actually kind of a way of making together these two. And since in TypeGoose, we are going to use some kind of experimental features, but it's production ready. So it's called decorators. In Java world, you may heard it as annotations. I will show an examples in a bit. So to use that one, we need a dependency called reflect metadata. So this is the one who actually make that decorator data available to TypeScript when it's compiling. And I installed the types for the Mongoose. And this is the lock for you if we are going to clone this one, and you are going to run it in Node version less than 10.15. I'm going to block you. I'm not going to allow you to run it. So it's just an different declaration to know the node that you need to have a version more upward than 10.15. So let's talk about what the changes that we have defined now. And we have a Mongoose.js. So this is actually a way of creating the connection for your database. So this is actually sending and creating another method to connect. So I'm going to use Mongoose Connect, and I pass the database URL and the options from the config, and it's going to be creating the connection for the database. And let's talk about my database model. So I have a model class for my database table or collection. So I'm using TypeGoose here. So I just forget all these things. I will explain it. just forget it. So you just have a class called book, and you have ISBN with a string. So in JavaScript, you define the type. This is Typescript. So you define the types like this. You put a colon and you put the type. And types normally in Typescript, actually, these primitive types are in simple. So all lowercase. So I have ISBN and a name, an author, and a year. So here's a number. In TypeScript, we don't have int or anything in the type. That is GraphQL. So this is in TypeScript. You have a number. It represents anything floating point or integer. So this prop is actually coming from TypeGoose or the Mongoose. So you can define how this is going to be saved in your database. Normally, if it is a prop and with a string, it's going to be creating a string type field in the database and author string type. And so these are primitive types, so it doesn't know the types of these. Only different thing is in here. So I'm defining an index called ISBN. ISBN making an index means it's like a primary key. So it's kind of be doesn't allow to have same ISBN number again and again. So it need to be unique. So that's the definition I'm putting it. And you have many other options. Since it is TypeScript, you can see the intelligence. So you have all the definitions. You have count, how many count is going to be, what is the default value. So you can define a default value for field. Or you can define, if it is a string type, you can define an enum. So this is going to be one of these values. So you can define enum and send an array of strings. And you can have index. If it's going to be a multiple items, you can use items. You can make it lowercase. Whenever time it's going to be insert, it's going to be lowercase. So yeah, there are many things available here. So I will show the documentation of these things. What are the things available? You can define the max length. So if I define a max length of 50, it's going to be limit the string cannot go than that one in the database. So basically for this demo, I'm not going to use much of database side of things because I'm actually more focused on the GraphQL and TypeScript. So this is the book definition, and I'm going to update our previous type definition that uses this defined content to send as a response. I'm going to delete this one, and I'm going to use our database collection to send this information. So I'm going to import my books from model/book. So I get it as a books as a plural. So I'm going to run a query now for the database. So this is a database query. This is not a GraphQL query. It's a GraphQL query definition, but it's going to use a database query to get the data. So I'm going to run one thing called find, and I need to put a wait because it's an asynchronous one. That means it needs to be async function. So now the server is restarting, and I need to change this one because I think I have added support for ISBN. It's going to be a string, right? I think you remember, and I changed its name. Hopefully, let's see this matches. ISBN name, author, and year. And the schema is ISBN name, author, and year. So since it's restarted, we will be able to see this one. So I'm going to refresh it, and let's see the docs. So it's still the same. ISBN name and author is here, and the schema is like previously. So if I run this one, hopefully I think there's no error. See, there's no error. Maybe it's taking some time to connect to the database. Connection is not good here, maybe. Let's see. Shouldn't be taking that much of time. Let's refresh it and try again. Let's type the query again. Yeah. Books and ISBN name and author. Let's check if the database is there or not. Do we have data? In the meantime, I'm going to drink some water. It's no error. Maybe something not that good. Okay, I remember. So you have defined a connect method from a database, but you actually forget to call it. So I'm going to create the connection for the database first. So I need that setup database method. Go in here and I need to import it from the database. Mongoose. Setup. It's from and click / mongoose. And hopefully it's going to be restart now. It's restarting. Okay. So I'm going to refresh it and query. Yeah, that's good. And we can ask for the year also. So now we are actually getting the data from database, a real database hosted in cloud. So I'm getting the data directly from my GraphQL server from the database. The only hard thing is that I need to define my schema in here, and I need to define the model in here. So it's going to be kind of defining many times in here. And yeah, so for now, we actually asking for data query. So let's type another query. So I need to get book by ID. So I will going to provide the ID or ISBN maybe. So let's get ID. So I'm going to show you how this is going to be saved in database opposed to this definition. So remember, I have a model option coming from type goes. We call it a decorator in JavaScript, the at notation plus this name and a method. So in here, I define timestamps true. So this is an option in Mongo. When we put the timestamp true, is create and two fields in each of the data document called created at and updated at. So whenever I update a document, it's going to update the date in that updated field, and whenever I create a new document, it put the created data time automatically. So I don't need to define it. And in MongoDB databases, you can see there's an underscore ID is already defined. I have ISBN and name, author, year. So if I cannot show it, I'm going to zoom it a little bit. Okay, I hope you can see it now. So it has an ID, ISBN, the name, and these two are coming from the timestamp. And this dash v is actually for the versioning of the documents. It's for the MongoDB side. We are going to skip it that. So in this ID, this underscore ID, but for Mongoose, it actually gives us it as ID. So I'm going to define that ID in here. So I'm going to open that ID. It's an actually ID because it's a unique ID. So I'm going to use that option in here. Okay. And there's an issue. What is going on? No, I think it's not in here. Okay, so this book pilot ID item isn't completed yet. So I have an ID. So if I run the playground again, just zoom it, I think we'll be able to see it more like this. If I put the ID in here, you can see that ID also coming out for us. So since I can use this one as a unique ID, I can get the data. So I'm going to get the list of names maybe, but for my carousel or the just showcase in my front end, I just only need ID and the name. But I need to get single data for this ID. So for that one, I'm going to define another query operation called book by ID. For that one, I need to have an argument defined. So I need to send an ID with a string type, and it's going to return a book. This is going to be written an array, and this is going to be written a book. For that one, I need to run the resolver, which is actually do the real work. So it is book by ID. And this is, of course, since it is a database operation, it's going to be async operation. And I'm going to await and books. In MongoDB, we have a method called find by ID. And I'm going to pass the ID. The thing is, the way GraphQL send the arguments to the resolvers are a bit different. So the method signature will be like this. Normally, resolver doesn't use any argument here. It's totally fine. Normally, resolver in GraphQL look like this. You get a parent, and you get args, and you get a context and info. The parent is actually if you have multiple queries coming up, and if you have a parent, so it's like a field resolver. If this is going to be accessed as a field resolver where you have an parent object, so you will get the parent object details from here, and the args is the one who actually sending this one. So args.id, we can actually access this one in here. And since we don't need parent, I'm going to put it underscore, and context we are not going to use. So these two properties after that is kind of, I can express this as an optional. And I'm going to use arg.id. I can save it. And since Typescript is going to ask me the types for these ones, and I'm going to define these two are any types. Any means it can be any type, string or anything. But I can define that args going to be like, for args1, I can define it like ID cert string. So it's only giving me the ID. You can see it's defining me the ID in here. If you put it any, it doesn't show anything. It's because it's any, it doesn't just some. This is my IDE plugins going on, it giving me the keywords in the same file. So I'm going to undo it and keep it like this and save it. And it's going to be hopefully working without any issues. Yeah. So yeah, it's running on that. So I'm going to refresh it a little bit. It's working. So I'm going to use the new one. You can see book by ID, and I need to pass the ID. So it's asked for ID. So yeah, it needs to be ID. So I'm going to copy one of these IDs and put it in here. And what are the options you need to expose? I need to get the ID, the author of this book, and the year only. Okay, look at what. So this is the book by ID, what you ask. and you have books. So you can see I just send in 2 operations in one single request. So if it is type in a REST world, you need to send 2 requests. So you need to get the books, and you get all the information of the books, and you get an ID from it, and you need to send it. And there's aliases also. If you want to make this book by ID as a book in this return array, so this is returning a data, always data, and it has these books and book by ID as the keys in the object, and it has a data inside of it. So if you want to make it come as book, it's called aliasing. You can type the book and put the colon mark. So this operation will be returned as this one. So if I run it, so now I can get as book. So whatever thing you define here is going to be the aliasing part. Since we are closing for a time, so I'm going to come up with the most exciting part now. So there's few things I need to mention. In the index file, I had to add this part to run the type goose. I already said that to run the decorators, we need to have this reflect metadata, and it need to be imported before you running MongoDB or TypeScript code. So not type goose code. So that's why I put it as the first line of the index file. So then now I'm going to solve an problem that you already maybe have in your mind. That is, you need to define your schema, the type definitions in here by one and one by one here, and you also need to define the same thing in here. So it's kind of doing the repetitive works. So how we can actually optimize this one? For that, there's a library called GraphQL. So if I go to what and why, so it's actually giving you typing only classes, and you can define this as object type. You know, scalar types and object types, so you can define this as object type, and you can define this as field. And field, this is for a custom object types. You need to define what are the type of the return type. So it is returning an array of rate objects. There's a recipe object type. It has an array of rate objects, and this is a nullable true. This is like this field can be null. For that one, you need to define like this one. I'm going to zoom it. Maybe you won't see. Yeah. So yeah, like that. So type GraphQL make it very easy that you will be writing your schema as only one time, no repetitive works. So I'm going to use this one with type goose that we use for the mongoose. So this is the type goose. So this is how you going to install type goose and this. So this is going to be like type goose that I'm already explained that part. I forget to show you the repository. So let's start with type GraphQL. For that one, I need to install it. So it has 2 dependencies. The GraphQL is already installed. It has a class validator and type GraphQL. I'm going to talk about class validator in the last few minutes of the hands-on. And let's move to type GraphQL, where I'm going to put more focuses on. This is actually telling me that to put the reflect metadata early. And yeah, this is the another part, because as I said that these decorators, even for the type goose, these decorators are actually coming from experimental types. So for that one, you need to define in type config, the TS config TypeScript. You need to tell TypeScript, you need to allow experimental decorators. And you also need to emit the decorator metadata, where it's going to be used by the reflect metadata library. So these two need to be enabled. And this is actually clear defined in their documentation, both of the type GraphQL and the type goes, and you need to target this one, and you need to also define the libraries. So this is like polyfills, so it's going to be put in the library. So normally this is the minimal type tsconfig file you need to have. So I'm actually already done it, hopefully. Yeah, I put the lib in here, I updated it, and these two are here. So yeah, good to go. So let's install like class validator, and I just copy it and paste it. I'm not good with these spellings. So it's going to be installing the dependencies now. Yeah, it's good. So now I am going to get rid of this schema. Before that, I need to define my object types with the type GraphQL. So I'm going to define this one as object type. So I'm not going to repeat it. Oh, not this one. I will import it manually. No, no. Okay, this is from type GraphQL. Okay. And it's okay. So it's going to be called now. And I need to define this one as a field. It's going to be imported from them. And since this is an index, I can define it returns an ID, and ID also imported from them. Type GraphQL. Type GraphQL has the all implementations for the definitions for the scalar types. So you can import it in here. So it's going to be ID. Okay, and this is also going to be a field. So if you are not define anything, I will show you in the demo later. If you forget to define this field, it's not going to be exposed in the type GraphQL, the GraphQL layer. So I'm defining only. I'm going to skip the year part for now and show you around. And the best thing is the ID is not showing in here. You can see, but you can define an ID string. First run this one and just come to that part. So this is how you define this one. And now how you're going to use this one. So since now you are defining with the type GraphQL, you need to create the resolvers also from there, because we are going to get rid of this schema definition file. Yeah, it's going to expose, because if you are going to create a very big project, then you need to have multiple things exporting here, and everything will be in this single file, or you need to use another library to compose multiple this definition schema definition files. So it's kind of going to be kind of a pain. So that's what we are going to remove it, and with the support of the Typescript. So I'm going to create a new folder called GraphQL, and it will be having another folder called resolvers. So I'm going to create a folder for resolvers so I can manage them with multiple resolvers rather than putting it in a single file. So it's a resolvers folder, and I will going to put the file. So this is going to be book resolver.ts. So it is going to create a resolver. So resolver going to be look like resolvers. So you can see this about queries and mutations. This is the simple resolver that you're going to define. You can define a resolver and a class resolver. So I'm going to start with that one. So I'm going to import the resolver from the GraphQL, and this is my book resolver, like that. And what else I'm going to export? So I have a method. So let's see. So I have a method. I can use this one or just type it. This one is books. So it is going to return without like that. So yeah, it is asynchronous. It's going to return all the books. So I'm going to define my books variable. This is for clear purposes. It's going to await for books. So I need to import it. No. Import books from my model file. Since there are multiple errors, it's not showing me all the things. So let's go with back. Here it's in models. It's called book. So I'm going to import books, and like value time is going to use find method to get all the documents. And I got all the books now as a constant variable, and I'm going to return the books. And I'm going to give you some information on the return types. So I can actually define the return types like this one. Since this is a asynchronous operation, it normally, not normally, absolutely return a promise, the type of book. So I need to import the book from here. And this is a book array. So if I define like this one, it should be a book array. If I try to then null, it's going to be warn me. Null is not assignable type. So if you forget to define this one, it's going to be implicitly get the return type of this one and put it like that one. So for your development purposes and for to make you very usable with these ones, better to use define the return types. And we also have another method, so I'm going to replace it. I need to have everything defined in here. So one is book by ID. And it's going to be a promise, and it only return a book. So let's start with that one. So I need to define a const variable called book, and I'm going to await for books.find. Oh, I need to get the ID. How I'm going to get this ID? Previously, it was like I'm having the parent, args, and context and everything here. But in type GraphQL, they actually make it very easy. They have arguments. So they have multiple ways of accepting arguments. Like you can use an annotation arg and give the argument name, and you can define it's going to be a nullable argument or not, and you define the name and this type of that one. So I'm going to use this method, or you can actually create your own archetypes also. You can define a class, and you can. This is kind of normal if you're having kind of a resources that you have multiple ways of filtering, that where is like name is like this one or year is like this one. So if you have multiple filtering capabilities like accepting multiple arguments, it's better to define it as a argument type rather than using it as just an arg in the method declaration. So I'm going to use this one, and it's going to be ID, and it need to be not null. And this is actually the definition. You can change it. Even this is the one who exposing for the GraphQL, and you can use any name for this one. This is for JavaScript. So you got the ID, and this is going to be find by ID. And I'm going to return the book. The thing is, it can be null. The result can be null. So I need to define it's only not, because if the ID is not the wrong, it's going to return a null. So this is telling me the Typescript that this will return book or null. So let's buckle it up and check the documentation how it's working on. So we will be very cool. So now I don't need the schema. I'm going to remove it. And I'm going to replace it with something from GraphQL called build schema from GraphQL. So you can replace this one. So I'm going to get the implementation from here. Should be in step 4, 5. I think it's 5. Not in 5. Then it should be in the last step. Yep. I will explain it now once I copy and pasted that one. So I'm going to replace these two things with the whole thing from here. And I'm going to import Node.js on dependency. It's actually a built-in module for path. Yeah, I'm going to explain it now. So this is actually a method exposed from the Type2 GraphQL where it's to build schemas. You can actually hard code and import this book resolver yourself and put it in here. So I'm actually giving you a more production version rather than a development version. So this is kind of a way of getting automatically from a folder and load the resolvers. So whenever I put more and more resolvers here, you don't need to change any code. It's going to be automatically loaded to your schema. So how is going to be performed? So we use a path method to resolve the directories. So I'm telling that I have my resolvers reside in GraphQL / resolver folder star dot, and this is actually for Typescript and JavaScript. So when it comes to production, we are running in the production. I said that we are running in JavaScript files. For development, we are running in TypeScript files. When we need to go to production, we compiled it and get a JavaScript, and JavaScript will be running in the server. So when we're running in the production, I'm going to check if we have the node environmental variable called production. If it is not production, use the ts extension .ts. If it is production, .ts .js extension. So this is actually a production friendly code. Sorry if it is kind of more confusing. So now we have these two, and so I think we can run it and check. So I'm going to run yarn dev. Okay, there's an error again. Let's see what I missed this time. Arg is not defined. So yeah, I forget to import it in the book resolver. So yeah, so this arg is not defined. So I'm going to space, yeah, okay, it's automatically imported. See if there's any errors this time when you're restarting. Starting, there's another error. So code in generating GraphQL schema. The query must be defined in one of all. Yeah, so I forget to define this as a query. So I need to make sure this is a query. So there's another one from GraphQL to make sure these two are queries. So another annotation like field, where you put the field annotation, and this is the query annotation. And you can save it, and hopefully it's going to be working this time. Let's see. Starting now. Now there's another. Let's see. So I'm debugging on the hands-on session. Okay. Since we are returning a books array, this is not a scalar type, which is not able to identify what is we are going to define. So we are need to define what we are going to return. I'm going to return a books array, so I'm going to return book array this time. And for this one, I'm going to return just a book, and maybe it can be null. So I can define nullable true. So I define the return type books array. It will be a book array. and it will be a book. It can be null. It's like putting in here in that type definition code, but this is now completely Typescript, so you cannot put that in here. You just define nullable true, and hopefully this time it should run. Yeah, still it's running. So let's go to the playground and refresh it, and let's check the docs now. So we have two methods, books, which is returning, and this says it should be returning anything and should be null. So if you don't have any document, this is going to be a problem. So I'm going to make sure this can be also null. I can define it's nullable true. And if I refresh it this now, so you can see that exclamation should be gone now. Should be not restarted yet. Let's see if it is restarted. Now it's still restarting. Yeah, it's restarted. Let's refresh it. Yeah, that mandatory field is going. Since we already have the same schema in here, should work now. Oh, there isn't the ID, so I'm going to remove the ID for now because I haven't defined the ID. There's no error. Okay. As I told you earlier, if I check the schema, I don't have year. Why is that? Do you remember I didn't add the field definition to this one because that's to show you that the exact thing that is going to be. So I'm going to make sure that it's going to be returning an int. Yeah, and it is also got from type GraphQL. And I'm going to define the ID. ID is not a prop because it's already in the Mongo. I'm going to just define a field. It is not an issue with this setup. So I'm going to define a field and it's going to be an ID. And I'm going to remove the ID property from the ISBN for now and just refresh. What I just did is I just put the field to the year and I just define the ID without prop. Since it doesn't have a prop, it doesn't going to work with type goose. It's going to ignore that part in the type goose, and it only works with the type GraphQL part. So if I refresh it again and go to the schema, I can see there's an ID with ID type, string, and integer is there, and now I can actually run this query without any issues. I can get it this one, and I can put ID in here. Okay, cool. So I think we already passed the time. I'm not sure. But if we Jin, can I have more minutes? So if I then I can actually explain about and mutation. Do you like to see how the mutations go? We have actually done the query part. How we're going to do a mutation? How we're going to process something like adding a new thing to the server, or we're going to modify the resource. Okay. Time in Philippines. Okay, we already spent 9:47. Okay, I'm going to finish it before 10. So let's try to finish it very quickly. Sorry for that, getting more time. Oh, okay, that's it. I can go to the final master because I think I already done it. So yeah, let's take into the master. I need to ignore these files. Speak quickly and explain this one. Discard files and type file. Let's move to the master. and make sure the dependencies are correct. Yeah, okay. So let's check the files. So in this one, in the resolvers, yeah, I have a mutation written in here. So yeah, I will going to give you some idea about it. So mutation is going to be kind of a updating something or changing something in the server or doing some action or executing the server. So I have an action called addBook, and it's going to have an argument called input. So why this is going to be input? This is kind of a normal way of, it's kind of a de facto, not de facto, it's kind of a standard with the developer community. We just put the input at input, so we can make sure that it's getting here. And the thing is, we need to define an input type to get these things in here. So I have already defined an input type called new book input. So I normally put the input in the end so I can identify this as an input. And I use an Typescript feature called implement partial. The partial is actually, you can actually get a complete class and get a parts of that class as an interface, and you can use that one to implement another class. So you make sure that you implement the same thing compared to the class. Because in a TypeScript, the GraphQL, you need to have two types for input and the normal types, the scalar types. The input is a different type. So you need to make sure, even though it is same, you need to define it again. So I define a book input format, so ISBN, name and year and author. And I use that input as my input, and I'm going to return the same book after saving, and I can use the method called create, and I pass just the input in here, and it's going to return the new book. So if I going to check the, okay, I need to start it, sorry, yarn dev. If you look in the docs, now we have a mutation called addBook, and I have input of this one, and you can click the arguments and you can check what are the inputs is accepting. And it's addBook. And then if you can check the skip, you can see there's an input type. So we normally define type input. So this is input as input, the keyword, and is ISBN and string is mandatory, name mandatory, yeah, mandatory, everything is mandatory because I didn't put the nullable true. So let's check how we're going to run this kind of input. I'm going to use teach you another thing also from here. Is called query variables. So I'm going to define the mutation at book. This the name is going to be pop in the tab name, and I'm going to define a variable called input, and it should be the type of the new input, new book input, and it's mandatory. And I can access this variable inside this query. So I'm going to call addBook, and it has a type definition for input, and I'm going to pass the input, the variable. And I need to define what are the return variables I'm going to accept. I'm going to check the new ID and maybe created that only. So in query variables, you can actually put the variable. So you just define the query like this, and you will pass the input data to the query. Then you can actually customize it later and later. So you can actually reuse the query and just change the variables. So I'm going to give the title. What's his name? That's no title. So name, Steve Jobs, book name, and it says ISBN. Okay, I'm going to define this as a string 78105164855. or 6. Yeah, this is a real ISBN number. I just Googled it earlier. I put it there. So writer is the author is Walter Isaacson. So you can see there's an updates showing me up that there's a year is missing. So here's an integer. So I need to define. I think it's the published in 2011. There's no error. That should run. So I got the new ID and created at. So if I run again this query, I will be able to see the new book added. And see there's 4 books now, and there's the Steve Jobs, the new book in here. If I want to get the whole information about this, I can actually put this ID in here and get the author year and what are the other fields we have. We have created data, it's already done, so I will get the ISBN. So yeah, you can see the new book details, Walter section, the things that I did. So this is a kind of a mutation, so you can actually use this my code to create the update and delete features and send a pull request to me. I'm going to accept it. And yeah, we actually came kind of a conclusion to the hands-on session. I'm going to move to the session, the remaining part. So things that you need to note now. So you already seen my hands-on session. So you may think that this is a way of running the database. No, don't get confusion. It's not way of managing a database. I just showed a way that you can actually reduce the files and reuse your definitions in a single file using the Typescript decorators. And the next thing is the schema is just representation of the resources and the operation to interact with. So you don't need to expose all your fields in the database. Like if you have updated that or created that field, you don't need to expose it for the front end. You can just not define it in the schema of the GraphQL, so it's going to be excluded. And you can actually create a REST GraphQL AI for the REST APIs rather than going with the database level and connecting the resolvers to the database. You can actually, there's a GraphQL, the Apollo GraphQL server support REST and GraphQL resources. So there's 2 plugins there where you can actually install it and just give the REST API endpoint, and it's going to be pull data from that endpoint, or you can give another GraphQL as a source rather than running your own resolvers to get data from the database itself. And I did this hands-on with MongoDB because I can get the free hosting from the MongoDB Atlas, so you can also get the free account and try out. And if you love SQL databases like MySQL or Postgres, and you're running it on a local server or your own server, you want to try it with the GraphQL, the type GraphQL, you can use a thing called TypeORM. This is another library like TypeGoose, which gives the power with the decorators to the model classes. The TypeORM actually connect with the Postgres, MySQL, and even SQLite, and there's some support for the MongoDB also. So you can use TypeORM for that one. And in summary, with today's session, sorry, I took much longer than I expected. Since it's a hands-on session, can be you cannot expect what things will happen that as you expected. So we talked about developer tool called Typescript, which is going to reduce the human errors. So I'm getting errors that I'm not returning the return type, then I'm accepting, or I'm trying to do an operation that is not permitted. So it is going to reduce the human errors from the Typescript type, and it actually giving the type support to JavaScript. We also talked about the exposing the resources or a database or something resources from a method called GraphQL. It's actually a kind of a way of exposing things, or we can call it a query language for APIs. And we also did a hands-on session. We took more than I expected. It's a basic GraphQL service using a implementation called Apollo server, and then we use type GraphQL
to get a decorator powers, and we use Typescript to connect to the MongoDB. So that's this kind of a simple summary for today's session. And if you like to read more on these things, you can actually get it from the more resources. Like if you want to learn things, sorry, there's a my dog is barking. Yeah, okay. So we have you can use the Typescript lang.org to actually get the information about Typescript, and we can use GraphQL.org to learn more about GraphQL. And there's a typegraphql.com where you can actually get the whole documentation which I've showed in the session also. And you can use Typegoo's documentation to get more about what are the props supports and what are the model options are there and what are the plugins support and all stuff for the Mongoose. And you can go to github.com/IamChathu/TypeScript GraphQL backend for today's session whole code base. And thanks for everyone who was in the online session and everyone who actually sharing support for my session in social media. And thank you very much, Women Tech Makers and GGG Philippines for giving me this opportunity. And thank you very much for even you being in online in this time. I think it's at 10 closer to 10 o'clock now in Manila. And for people who are in with WTM, they have a Google Classroom to connect with me or further on these issues, even for basic stuff that you couldn't understand with this hands-on. Maybe I was too fast on going with the code. Sorry for that. And you can use this class code to connect with me in the Google Classroom, or you can find me in Twitter at @IamChathu, or in the Facebook also. You can facebook.com/IamChathu is there, and LinkedIn also same URL, but someone is actually got that URL in Instagram, so it's not the same one in Instagram. And credits. So special thanks to make this slide carnival people who actually make this presentation template, and the photographs actually from it is actually used in using Unflash. And before running this session, all the proofreading was done by my friend Puputu Kodikara. He made things very pleasant for you. So he fixed my grammar errors and even some stuff that I put in the content. And thank you very much. And normally I put that's all folks at the end, but this time it kind of be to be continued. So we are planning on using this backend in a React frontend using GraphQL, consuming the GraphQL API in a later session. Hope you will be more intrigued to learn that part as well. Yeah, thank you very much for having me here.